Hi, I'm Meta Spencer. Let's have another schmooze day. It's Tuesday, and that's the day when we generally don't plan our talk shows. I invite people who don't necessarily know each other, although in this case, they sort of do. And we talk about whatever's on their minds and without any reservations. So I have two guests so far, and a third guest who may have forgotten, but we're going to remind him and see if he pops up. Where are you? In Minnesota someplace, right? Is Ann Frisch?
Yes, I'm in the Twin Cities, a very small town called White Bear Lake, north of St. Paul.
All right. Well, it's good to see you. And let me, I know that you're a retired professor at the University of Wisconsin, but I looked and I didn't see what your field was. I've forgotten.
I was professor of education and human services on the human services side.
Okay. Here comes Shabir. All right. Anyway, in Toronto here with me is Kehkashan Basu. Kehkashan is a record setter, I think. She has broken all records because she became a peace organizer when she was, I believe, 5 years old.
Yes.
Kehkashan began organizing other children for peace work when she was a little girl, and she's kept it up and has been become the organizer of something called Green Hope, which is an organization of young people all around the world. I think they're more than 5 years old, mostly, though.
We're 10 years old this year.
10 years into what? When do they become too old to belong?
Oh, no. The age limit does not exist. I'm saying we are 10 years old because we started 10 years ago.
Oh, right. Well, okay. How old does a person need to be to belong to Green Hope?
We don't have an age limit. Although we are youth run, we accept members of all ages because we believe that age has nothing to do with capability.
Mm-hmm. It's good to have both of you. And the thing that you have in common is that both of you are very strong peace activists and environmental climate change activists as well, if I'm not mistaken. And here comes
the nuclear weapons side.
Well, it's also nuclear energy issues for you, isn't it, Ann? Because I know you, one of the first things I learned about you when we met was that you were very engaged with the question of how to, worried about the transport of nuclear waste through areas where you live, or maybe where anybody lives. I mean, it's a bad thing to be transporting along the highways and so on. In fact, if you don't mind bringing me up to date a little bit, just a sec though, I want to introduce Shabir Gwynn, who is, I believe, just joining us. Shabir, hello, how are you?
Hi, thank you. I got a little trapped in some problems here. Okay.
Oh, okay, well, I'm glad you've joined us. And we have Ann Frisch in Minnesota, and Kehkashan Basu here in Toronto, and Shabir is also in Toronto. Shabir is a long-term member of the editorial board of Peace Magazine, and I think he spends his nights tossing and turning and worrying about the Modi government in India these days, which he disapproves of heartily. So, as you all know, we are all free to bring up whatever topic we want, and I just spoiled that by asking a little bit of information from Ann Frisch to, if you don't mind, bringing me up to date about what is going on with that issue of the transport of nuclear materials along the highways and so on, before we talk about whatever else is on our minds.
Well, my work on that has been set aside because there's so much about nuclear weapons, and now the Ukraine crisis, ground zero for nuclear war, has just been absolutely consuming me. But there are still issues of we don't have a permanent repository. I don't think it's possible. In fact, it might be better to keep little pockets of the stuff. in place rather than spreading it all in one great big lump. But there is still shipment of nuclear materials. One that got me very alarmed was one that was bringing high-level shipments to South Carolina from Canada along a road 4 miles from my daughter's house in New York. And so I paid attention to that for some time. The shipments have concluded. I think there were some incidents, but nothing catastrophic. I think in a conversation with my public safety director in Minnesota is that the role of the state when there are these shipments come through, they're all authorized, the companies are all authorized by the federal government, and the states do not know when they come through. The job is to secure the area, and then it's up to the companies to bring in the remediation, and we're hoping they have a hotline, but I've never been able to find out who the companies are that get brought in. Is there a SWAT team of sorts? One would hope so. Do they have the truckers have a hotline to the feds somehow? It's something I never was able to determine, but it's still going on. There is no resolution. And in Canada, there are a lot of efforts to stop the proliferation of nuclear materials, supposedly these new small reactors, which of course wouldn't have the advantage of the large scale in terms of cost, and the cost overruns are tremendous, and the new ones have never been built. So it's an industry proposition that has gained a lot of currency. People are fighting to keep nuclear out of the climate green banks and green plans, but they inevitably get in there. So yeah, it's a tremendous problem. And even in Ukraine, my current concern is that there are 15 nuclear reactors in Ukraine, and how the dickens can you even fathom a war? Everybody should be saying, cool it. We got nuclear reactors here. We don't want any Fukushimas. And then there's the matter of Chernobyl sitting there, the safe containment for the nuclear materials that spilled over in 1968. So,
yeah. Well, now we have a real sense of where your interests lie. I think you probably do want to talk about Ukraine today, and that may be what other people want to talk to. Let's ask Kehkashan and Shabir what's on their minds. Kehkashan, what are you lying awake nights worrying about?
Well, with my organization working across, we work across 26 countries, and therefore we understand how important it is to localize our solutions, to understand local challenges, and that is why the problems we address are very diverse. Of course, one of the main ones being nuclear disarmament, and of course, Ukraine and the threat of a nuclear war. And, just to agree with Anne, one of our main areas of work is also ensuring that people understand how dangerous nuclear energy can be. Not just, people just see the fact that there is no carbon dioxide involved in it and they think it's clean, but even the siting and the getting the materials, it's from indigenous land. Mostly it's from land that is mostly occupied by racialized people. And of course, that affects them disproportionately with the uranium mining and getting into the groundwater. And that is very bad for them. So and that's how, we bring in the environmental aspect in as well, not just the social aspect. So yeah, my work is very much bringing together the environment, society, and the economy. And we're all about ensuring that we are able to solve the world's greatest challenges through empathy, through education, through ensuring that no one's left behind.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, as a matter of fact, I'm just now looking for the phone numbers of 3 former nuclear regulatory commissioners in different countries, because I want to get in touch with them about filling a role in the organization or the network Project Save the World. They and another regulatory commissioner, Gregory Yachko, recently published a paper together declaring that it's a big mistake that people are thinking of using nuclear power as a way of combating climate change. That they claim that is absolutely no solution, and they should be in the business of knowing why, because that has been their role to ensure the safety of the nuclear power plants in their respective countries. So I'm going to track these folks down and try to see if maybe I can get a talk show with them or something that would bring this very point into the foreground. So
it is important that people know about it, because like the climate nuclear nexus isn't addressed enough. And like, yeah, I was at COP26 in Glasgow, and like there's this whole in the exhibition center, like this whole booth dedicated to how important nuclear energy is to solve climate change. And I am, standing there in my talk saying that no, do not use nuclear energy for this without knowing the risks. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was like, and people were supporting it because again, they see the lack of CO2 and they're like, okay, sure, let's go for it, which shouldn't be.
It is clearly the most divisive topic in the peace movement. You can get, I don't know what the ratio is, but the plus and minus side, the pro and the cons, they're not probably evenly divided, but I wouldn't hazard a guess as to which one is dominant. I would think that in public opinion today, it looks like the public support for nuclear is growing, but I'm only guessing. Polls would tell us that, and I don't know of any polls on the subject. Do any of you know of a poll about public opinion on this issue? No. Okay. Shabir, come and tell us what you're all about.
Well, I'm very concerned about what's all the stories about the crisis in Ukraine. My hunch is I don't think Putin is stupid enough to launch, to invade Ukraine. I don't think he's going to do that. But I'm very concerned about his going to China and, joining hands with Xi Jinping, whose policies I do not trust. Xi Jinping is extremely aggressive, and I don't know what his contribution to the Ukraine crisis is going to be. But I would refer you to an article that I was reading in Foreign Affairs. This is the 26, July-August edition, 2006. And it's an article by Dmitry Trenin, who's the Carnegie. Mm-hmm. He's in the Carnegie Moscow Center, and he's written, he wrote in 2006. If you read the article, you'd think it was written today. Exactly what is happening right now. With the buildup of the tension between Russia and the West. And he feels equally strongly that that Putin is not really interested in attacking. They just want NATO to stop expanding eastwards, and that's my point, the main point.
Go on, elaborate, because I know that this is on Anne's mind too, and mine. But I'm sort of I'm staying out of this. What does Trenin say? He's, by the way, the head of the Carnegie thing in Russia now, I believe.
He's the deputy. He was the deputy director of the Carnegie Moscow Center. Anyway, when the discussions between Gorbachev and the Bush government, Gorbachev was promised that NATO would not expand eastward, but that promise has been broken several times. Most of the East European countries are now under NATO. The Baltic states are under NATO. And the next step is Ukraine. Now, people say that Ukraine is not interested.
Excuse me, Shabir, I have to qualify what you said. because I did a conversation last week with Pavel Palaschenko, who was the interpreter when that conversation took place. He was between Baker and who was it? Shevardnadze? I've forgotten. I know it was Baker.
Baker and Gorbachev, I think.
Was it Gorbachev in person?
I think so.
Moscow, and he went into details about that, but he basically said that was only in the context of the admission of with the reunification of Germany and the admission to NATO. And Gorbachev had been very worried about that, and yet he did not stop it. And Palaschenko said that it would not have been possible. In fact, it would have been considered ridiculous for Gorbachev to have proposed or asked for what I thought all along Gorbachev should have asked for, which is put this in writing and promise that you're not going to move to the East. But Palaschenko, unfortunately, is the only person who I know really knows what was said, declared that that would have not been intended or even assumed to be the meaning of that promise, except insofar as it had to do with Germany and that situation. Now, one can argue with that, and I don't want to even agree with him, but, I use my guest. I couldn't argue too much with him because he was there. Anyway, I think I feel kind of obliged nowadays when people say what you said, which is what I've always believed, and that is that Gorbachev made a mistake in not demanding a real commitment not to move NATO east.
In writing.
In writing.
That's right.
Or, like a treaty or some definite promise. Mm-hmm. And Palaschenko said he could not possibly have made such a promise. So there you go. So I interrupted you. Go ahead. Anyway, because I think your argument is sound. Well, I don't know what you're arguing, but I think you're right. Go on.
Well, we have to see how things develop. But at the moment, I think the Europeans, the West Europeans, Germany and France, seem eager to discuss things so that they can arrive at a diplomatic solution. I think Macron and Scholz are both in Moscow today, or they were yesterday, to discuss things with Putin. And I haven't heard anything about what they were able to find out or what they were able to agree on. But I'm hoping that some diplomatic solution can be arrived at, and the West stop blowing up this idea that that an invasion is imminent. I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, let's face it. In Crimea, going back to Crimea, the annexation. I don't know the history. Perhaps somebody could clear this up for me. But I understand that most of, at least half of Crimea is Russian speaking, and they tend to be favorably disposed towards what Moscow thinks. And the other thing is that Sevastopol is the Russian naval base, which I don't believe the Russians will ever give up. They will never give up. It's like expecting the United States to give up Groton on Connecticut. It's a submarine base. Can you imagine if the Russians decided to come to Mexico tomorrow and say we want to establish good relations with Mexico? The Americans would be very annoyed and upset, and justifiably so.
Well, in fact, they were, because the example of Mexico isn't very far from the real life example of Cuba. And in the Cuban Missile Crisis, I think the point is well taken that they say that's exactly parallel. And
exactly,
you're right. It does make sense. Mm-hmm.
So, can somebody tell me about Crimea?
Well, I could jump in here. colleague of mine, Eric Arnault, wrote a long piece about actually being in Crimea and talking to people after that election, and people were very strongly supporting being aligned with Russia. And they voted. And of course, no one in the international community has said, let's take a revote. We doubt the results of that election. And I remember at the time thinking, yeah, people are going to say it's a fake election, gun at your head. But from what I've heard more recently from people that I trust, that was a very sincere, and of course it's Russian speaking, as you said, Russian culture. So the other day I was listening to Vladimir Kozin, and while I also sense Russia's not going to launch an attack, he said, and he quotes the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe as saying, 14,000 people have been killed in Donbass, the other Russian-speaking culture area. And that there are, according to the OSCE, 150,000 Kiev troops on the border of Donbass. So remember that there's been some comments in the media, US claims that there are ununiformed soldiers crossing the border to stir up Donbass so that Russia can claim there's a reasonable provocation to come and defend Donbass. And what Kozin said was, we have no plans to invade Ukraine. But if Kiev comes and attacks Donbass, we will defend them. And that was in a video. Now, I tend to trust Kozin a bit. He seems like a reliable spokesperson for Russia and pretty fact-based person. So again, though, how do we assess all the misinformation and disinformation and propaganda coming out of what seems like everywhere? And I am very amused that in my vaccinated community, we disparage those who have aligned themselves with the anti-vaxxers and how it's not scientific, it's not verifiable, it's all propaganda. And yet right within the, in my own community, there's tons of propaganda. If I bring up, but here's a perspective from a Russian, I feel like I have to defend myself. Like, are they going to think I'm a traitor, or am I just buying all the Russian propaganda? So this is a very complicated moment for me, because even in the anti-war community, I hear credible scholars saying Russia seized Crimea, Russia annexed Crimea, the kind of the inference that it was by force. And then my friends and colleagues who say, no, this was a very sincere attempt to take a side that would protect them. So it seems to me that my idea that Russia might cross the border or might be provoked to cross the border around Kiev, coming very close to Chernobyl, which would be absolutely unthinkable that any kind of attack would come around Chernobyl. And yet it's not that far away as the crow flies from Donbass. So I'm now anticipating that there's more focus on Donbass is where a conflict might happen and Russia would come to their defense.
Well, I do think that going into war right now during a pandemic would not be a great move by anyone. I do agree that it's probably not the move that people are going to make. But what I am most concerned about is that people are even talking about going into war. I mean, you'd think that in the 21st century, and like so many years past the times that we think that, oh yeah, we've achieved equality, we've achieved this and that we'd be past that we wouldn't really be talking about going into physical war. It would more be in the discussions in a room where you can have diplomatic resolutions and you wouldn't have all of this fighting. But yeah, that's especially during a time like the pandemic where the UN did call for a ceasefire. And the fact that it actually had to do that is also really sad, because it shows us that we're not really at the level of human evolution that we would like to believe, because we still have all of these things going on and talking about fighting. So yeah, that is what concerns me the most. I really, really hope that these situations are resolved in by people talking it out rather than actually fighting, and that the money that is going into people trying to fuel this war actually goes towards solving the pandemic and all the issues that have arisen from that. So yeah, that's where I stand on this. And it's not just like Ukraine that's on my mind as well. Like, you still have like the issue of Taliban and like Afghanistan, what's going on there, that has still not been solved. I mean, even that is an example of how the world hasn't taken action to do something for the people of the place and allow an invasion, again, like using terms that we thought we'd left behind. That you just like thinking about that as well. So like, yeah, I think that resources need to be dedicated to stop all of that, to make sure that we actually can bring about peace and justice and equality, rather than move towards war because it's hurt someone's ego very high ups.
When people say we will defend the Donbass if it's attacked, I have to put that in my own mind in context of a statement made by somebody in the U.S. I don't know whether it was in the Pentagon or intelligence or where, but they claim that the Russians have prepared a false flag presentation, a video in which they have had actors pretend to be invading and other people pretend to be dead and things like that, to act as if, to pretend that the Ukrainians are attacking the Donbass. Now, if there's anything that would be ridiculous now, it would be perfectly, totally idiotic and completely incomprehensible for the Ukrainian government to take this moment to launch a big attack over Donetsk and Luhansk. But the claim is that this has been prepared as a justification for Russians to invade, because they'll be simply reacting to the Ukrainian government's attack on the region. And you've got to decide whom to believe. In this case, one of the things that has always puzzled me as somebody who's studied Russia a lot, or at least I wrote a book about Russia. Maybe I didn't study it enough, but I spent 28 years trying. And one of the things that always used to amaze me is the frequency with which there was a reference to provocation. And by provocation, they mean not you just made me so mad I couldn't control myself and I hit you, which is a legal definition in a very weak one, but that's the kind of thing that a lawyer might use. But provocation to them means something like attacking your own people and making a record of it and pretending that it was the other guy who did it, so that you have a justification for attacking them. And the frequency of this kind of logic always used to astonish me, because it's just something that I don't think at least Canadians do. And I don't know anybody in even the US who thinks that way, in terms of faking an attack so that you can pretend that you've been attacked and therefore you're justified, when you're really the one going to attack. So, that I personally would be inclined to believe the allegation that the intelligence has found this video they've made to try to create the illusion that the Ukrainians started it first. Anyway,
Yeah.
I should shut up.
No, I just wanted to add, I heard about that as well. And just to add, that actually kind of relates very well to how, technology can, obviously such an amazing tool, but it can also be used as a tool to spread disinformation, misinformation, and to sway public opinion and just make it seem that something's happening when it really isn't. So, yeah, I think that, and playing the blame game that they started it. No, they started it. So yeah, I think that's where we need empathy and where we need people to have the education to know that there's whatever you see online or outside what people are saying might not, they're trying to convince you and it's propaganda, but it might not be true. So take it with a grain of salt.
Yes, and I think it's really interesting that this is the kind of thing that gets the headline, this supposed video of attack, rather than the prediction using all the data by Princeton that a war would start in Ukraine under a misunderstanding. Or Alan Reibach's study on an analysis of India-Pakistan potential for war with just 100 nuclear weapons would actually bring the world to a halt, not because of the radioactivity or the injuries or the deaths, but because of the soot in the air. So you have soot blocking the sun for decades. You can't grow crops. So you have famine. So that's 100 nuclear weapons, which is probably very, very small action and a day's work. And then in the bulletin of time.
Excuse me, but are you proposing that you think that the Russians presumably would use nuclear weapons in a war against Ukraine? I don't think so. I think if they go in, they'll use those troops they put there, which are ground troops, tanks and all that. I mean, they might, I think it's 50-50. I don't know whether they're going to go or not. I'm not so sanguine as you guys are, but I won't argue against your point of view. I just don't know. But if they go in, I sure don't think they're going to be using nuclear weapons. No.
The study I'm referring to was by Princeton University. They made a 4-minute video showing this and fast forward with the launching of most of the world's nuclear weapons, starting by a misunderstanding. It's a hypothetical, but based on their analysis of who has what and what people are inclined to do, potential for misunderstanding. And it was not done in the current context, but it was done, just 2 or 3 years ago. So the situation in Ukraine had already started unraveling with the overthrow of the Russian-oriented president and the Maidan revolution, so to speak. So it's not that people are talking about it right now. They're not talking about nuclear weapons at all. But there is also the temptation to use a tactical nuclear weapon when you're not getting your way. And a study that was reported in the Bulletin of Atomic Sciences just this week cited a Louisiana Tech an analysis that showed nuclear war is winnable. And that's what they're teaching the Air Force soldier pilots and people involved in the Air Force, that a nuclear war is winnable. So if you have your partisans trained in a nuclear war is winnable, they might start with a small nuclear weapon that's misunderstood, and maybe it's not even true. So that's where all this disinformation, the propaganda, I really was shocked, but probably shouldn't have been, by how much propaganda was in this document. not even giving the straight story on the Cuban Missile Crisis. So I haven't heard it in the current context. In fact, I'm not hearing anything about nuclear weapons.
No, I would love to hear people talk about what you think the most promising solution would be. I think Macron is, I don't know how much this new guy, this German guy, Schultz, is intending to depart from US leadership, but Macron is pretty specific about saying, Europe needs its own policies and doesn't necessarily have to be guided by the decisions made by the US. And I imagined he's trying to find a compromise, but I don't know what it would be. Now, the easy thing for him to do, Macron could say, look, I am, leader of at least France, and will be for a while. And as long as I'm in office, we can guarantee that NATO will not move into Ukraine, will not admit Ukraine. And of course, he can't bind his successors to the same policy, but there's no real likelihood that the NATO would accept, or that even Ukraine would be very soon trying to get into NATO. So it would be an easy thing for them to say, well, for the next 30 years, we promise we won't let NATO in. And that might be enough to mollify Putin. What do you think?
Zelensky has admitted on a number of occasions he doesn't believe that the Russians have any plans of invading Ukraine, not unless they're forced to. And once again, I fear the alliance between Russia and China and what impact that's going to have on the whole issue.
The one real solution to me seems like Ukraine could be allowed to become a neutral country like Austria.
Mm-hmm.
That would just completely avoid the NATO thing. You're not aligned, period. I think that even might be appealing to Ukraine, because they're not going to like anything that happens when the big powers get fighting.
I mentioned this to Palaschenko, the idea of having Ukraine be similar to Austria. And he said, well, he's one person. He's just one guy. And his opinion is maybe worth no more than yours, except that he is close to the places where decisions are made, or he was. And he thought that the opportunity for that has long passed, that it would have maybe been possible some time ago. But right now, everybody has put their chips on their shoulders and is, daring the other guy to make a move. And Ukraine is not going to back down enough to say, yes, we promise to be neutral. I think it would be an excellent solution, personally. And they have the capacity to do it. And it might even be true that the majority of the Ukrainian population and citizens would prefer that. My friend Andrei Kamenchikov in Kiev, when he was speaking on the Global Town Hall, he said that people are simply sick of the war that's already been going on for 8 years in the Donbass. Has it been that long in the Donbass? Anyway, it's been a while. And he said, they just want peace, and they don't even care which side wins particularly. They would be, even if it means that the eastern parts of Ukraine even joined Russia, a lot of the Ukrainian population would accept that just to bring an end to the whole conflict. And certainly it seems to me that many people would be satisfied, or should be satisfied, with a guarantee that Ukraine would be a neutral country and should never be attacked by either side, and will not join any kind of alliance. The odds of that are pretty slim, I gather.
But at the same time, I do think that becoming a neutral nation would be beneficial for peace. But I think that, if enough people bring it up, have discussions about it, try to see how best that will work, this chance is still there. It might be slim, but yeah, the chance is there that it might be possible. So yeah, I think a lot of things have been put into perspective with the pandemic and with how situations have been faring out. So maybe we might see Ukraine as a neutral country sooner rather than later.
Mhm.
Well, let's fantasize what the civil society could do. So we have truckers in Canada who are totally upending the country with promises that's going to happen over face masks and other egregious impositions by government. Why can't the truckers be brought in on nuclear abolition or peace in
They would be on
Ukraine?
the side, honey. I'm sorry, but they would be all for nuclear weapons. Like you can be sure they're in favor of guns,
Stay out.
So,
Stay out. Don't even get near. Sorry, bad fantasy, huh?
Well, no, it's a delightful fantasy, but I just dare you to try it. You go and talk to those guys and see how far you get. I mean, they're going around, driving around hospitals, blasting their horns to bother the sick people and the healthcare workers on some principle or other. I don't exactly know what their theory is, but it sure don't make sense to me,
Yeah, we were told University of Toronto, they send out a notice saying that please don't come to campus during these times because it's not safe. But thankfully, everyone was fine, and Toronto handled it much better than Ottawa did. But still, it is very scary to see that literally people would be up in arms about something that is supposed to save their lives. So yeah, and the other thing that I wanted to say in this regard is if you saw in the news in the Olympics, Canada and Russia hockey, they played wearing masks, and people are saying that if you can play hockey wearing at an Olympic level wearing masks, you can wear a mask to a grocery store. So it's just
Yeah. I agree. But what now? You say that Ontario has handled this better than Ottawa. I don't know what you're talking about. Can you?
Yeah, so because Ottawa was completely unprepared for the whole onslaught of truckers coming in. So Toronto, part Montreal, places that where the protest came after Ottawa, it handled it better because they at least knew what to expect. So in terms of road closures and making sure that it was restricted to certain areas. In that sense, it was handled better. But with Ottawa, it just came in and they had no idea what it was going to look like. So just in that sense.
What did they do? I didn't follow that. I knew that this weekend they were supposed to have a big blockade of Queen's Park or something, but I don't know what happened. Did the police route them away and say you can't come into certain streets or what?
Yeah, I think more police protection in that sense, and of course blockades and road closures as well to make sure that it wasn't in areas where, in residential areas or things like that. So they just kept it to that certain areas, and it was more controlled than the Ottawa protest, which, frankly speaking, gets out of control very often. Again, because as I think the mayor of Ottawa said, or someone said that it wasn't built to be under siege. So it's just, the other cities are more well equipped in that sense.
Okay, but I hear the Globe and Mail today reports that this is a movement that's spreading around the world, that people in, all kinds of countries are watching the truckers in Canada and deciding that they want to have a movement similar to that. So that it's becoming the focal point for uniting right-wing, basically anti-democratic countries or movements everywhere in the world. God knows what's going to come of that.
And they're saying they're putting it like these are Canadian truckers doing it, and like every single person in Canada knows it's absolutely not true. And like there are truckers who are writing from Canada, writing about how that definitely does not reflect their views. And if you see like the pictures, they have like Trump 2024 and like the Confederate flags of the U.S. there. So it really is. It's not a Canada thing at all. It's just like right. The only common thing they have is like a lot of them are right-wing, far-right activists. So
now, are these truckers who are always crossing the border? So they could be Americans who are always bringing in loads of things into Canada. Is that why they could even come in to do this?
Yeah, that's what it seems like, because it is. I mean, the reason they planned this thing was because of the cross-border rules and the COVID-19 rules in the cross-border areas. But like, now it's just there is a lot of people who are American, not Canadians or anything like that. It's just like, I mean, why else would you have US flags and like Trump 2024 and Confederate flags when you're protesting in Ottawa? So, it's.
But Trump finally got vaccinated himself, even after he caught the COVID. So it isn't like Trump could present himself as the leader of the anti-vax crowd, could he?
No, I don't think so. Like, but try to reason with them. They can't really be reasoned with. So
but now these guys are in their car or their cab or whatever you call this compartment where they drive almost the whole time. They're not out on the streets, or except when they have to fill up their gas tank or something, I gather. Why would they? I mean, in their truck, they don't have to wear a mask, I assume. What is the problem? What bothers them so much that they find it unbearable that they have to? They're expected to ever wear a mask.
I think it's the vaccines. That's something that they're really against. And like when they come out, I think to unload or like get the stuff in, they have to wear masks as they come out of their trucks or interact with people when the window is down. So I think
because they're not vaccinated, they have to wear, well, even if they are vaccinated, they have to wear masks. So their protest must be both against having, do they require people to be vaccinated to come into Canada? Do these guys, is that the problem, that they're not allowed into Canada unless they're vaccinated? I don't think so.
I think that there are exemptions, but like I'm not too sure on this.
Be interesting to even talk to them and find out what their argument is, because I don't know any right-wing people. It's true that I live in a bubble, and I think most of us only see people who think the way we do, and I find it just absolutely incomprehensible that anybody would choose to subject themselves to the risk of dying and then of passing on the disease to kill somebody else rather than wear a mask or get vaccinated. Is just completely crazy. And I can't believe that sane people think that way.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a political element to this, because I've heard the Ottawa police were criticized for not being a little more aggressive in stopping the truckers. And the argument was made that if there was a protest led by the blacks or other minorities, the police would have very swiftly closed up the operation and rounded them up and ended the dispute. This is an interesting claim.
Yeah, I actually agree with that. It's very strange to see how the police are behaving so nicely with people who are literally human rights. And like when you have Black Lives Matter protests, or like when you have people, protesting for Indigenous rights, like police are immediately on there, like right from the get-go, like even if they haven't done anything wrong, which, if it's a peaceful protest, they haven't done anything wrong. So it's like very, very enforced. But yeah, for here, it's like one arrest, one person, two people, that's it. But for like, as you said, the Black Lives Matter protests and like other once that's led by minority groups, it's like immediate, very large number of protests, arrests.
Take their keys away from them and just drive their trucks away. Why aren't they doing that? Just saying, we're arresting you, now hand over your keys to the truck. Of course, if I were to drive the truck, it might be a bit of a problem.
But still, like, the thought is definitely there, as Shabir. So, like, why aren't they enforcing the law more actively compared to other protests that are rightfully, like, it's peaceful. They're protesting for human rights, whether these guys are like against it. So
the answer is that it's that the police and the truckers are one. Just as in January 6th insurrection, or it's now being called by one of their supporters as a legitimate protest, legitimate public discourse, that the people generally who are white and sort of militarized are inside the bureaucracy, and so are either overtly supporting it or not doing anything, which really proves the case that the Black Lives Matter has made, is that the law is stacked against us. Just look at these examples and just look at January 6th, and you know that the reason they weren't all hauled up, beaten by the police, of course, the police weren't there. I mean, National Guard wasn't there. They were all somewhere else. So the Black Lives Matter have really proved their case in some of these instances. I still, there's something about me that also, I not admire the cause, but the action. I wish we could all do more of this. But I'm not a trucker either.
Urinating on public monuments?
No, I should be careful about what I say about this. I'm just saying the truckers have everybody immobilized without doing any violent actions.
But they are.
they defaced the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, the Terry Fox statue, and like literally people are saying that is a person who campaigned for healthcare, for cancer research, and these are people who are doing the exact opposite. So yeah, in that sense, like it's a huge insult because, and not just to people whose families were affected, or it's just to everyone. Like, you do not go deface the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier or a national hero like Terry Fox. So
I hadn't heard that, but
no, there's real intimidation. A lot of the health workers are afraid to go to work, and have even asked. Some of them have asked for a police escort or something just to go to their jobs because they're so harassed and intimidated on the street. So people are, the general opinion in Ottawa is that it's unbearable to live there now. You can't tolerate this any longer. And
a lot of sexist and racist abuse being hurled at the healthcare workers and as well, so like by the truckers. So yeah, it's that.
Well, I stand admonished on that. I had not heard that side of the story.
Okay, I think we're all in favor of nonviolent resistance as a method. Certainly I'm a great, advocate of, Gene Sharp and all of the people who've taken lessons from him. But this is not a nonviolent civil disobedience. This is uncivil, and this certainly is disobedient, but it's not civil, and it's not the kind of model that you want to emulate.
I'd like to ask Anne a question, and that is, what is the general feeling in the United States about Narendra Modi and what he is doing in India?
Basically, we don't think about India at all. I have actually heard that there are actually genocidal movements against Muslims. Probably, but I don't hear any discussion of this in the media. Among my friends, they don't talk about India at all, which I think is pretty scary because
Yes.
I just don't know what's going to happen over there.
I don't know whether you heard about this, but in Haridwar, which is one of the pilgrimage sites for the Hindus, there was an open declaration where the speaker suggested that we should start killing Muslims. And a friend of mine who teaches at the New York University, she teaches film studies, and she was saying that there's a Holocaust is imminent in India. I hope that's not true, but anything is possible at the moment. India is getting from bad to worse. The people are these BJP and RSS goons have been given the freedom to attack anybody they want. And it's happening all over the country, with the exception of perhaps West Bengal, Kerala, and Tamil Nadu. But it's very serious because this democracy is being assaulted, and I fear it's growing, and it's being supported by the middle class, the upper middle class, the elite, the English-speaking crowd. They're all voting for Modi. And I don't see. I've heard that there's a lot of opposition and a lot of grumbling going on because the price rise, basic essentials like kerosene and propane and food, the cost is escalating, and people are finding it very, very difficult to survive. So the opposition is growing, that's for sure. I don't know whether it's enough to topple the government.
Thank you all. This has been troubling. Our conversation hasn't been fun, but it's been about what's on our minds, and we have spoken our minds, I think, today. So thank you all three very much, and good wishes, and have a good day. Project Save the World produces one of these shows 3 days a week, and sometimes more. This is episode 410. You can watch them or listen to them as audio podcasts on our website, tosavetheworld.ca. Eventually, we even post the transcripts there. When you get to the website, please look around, because we have conversations going on there all the time about 6 global issues, plus potential reforms in governance, economics, and civil society. To find a particular talk show, enter its title or episode number in the search bar, or the name of one of the guest speakers. And after you've watched or listened, scroll down and share your thoughts about the show with the other viewers. This is a place for dialogue, so please join in